Saturday estimates for Shazam's box office are out, and the Sunday early projections are out. And at this stage, they are saying that for the US domestic market, Shazam has earned $56,775,000 up until midnight Sunday, which obviously hasn't happened yet in America, but that are their current projections and current estimates. But they're not including $3.3 million from their advanced screenings from several weeks ago. Some films would include that. Warner Brothers is not. Now, they shouldn't be included because they didn't happen over the weekend, but nor did another $5.9 million that happened on the Thursday, but they do get included. But whatever, they've discounted $3.3 million. So officially speaking, Warner Brothers is claiming $53.45 million as the opening weekend in the US domestic market, and that is exactly how Box Office Mojo is reporting it as well. So it's earned 56.8, let's call it, but they're saying it's 53.4. Okay, now I projected yesterday that it'll get around about $60 million based on the Friday numbers, and what's essentially happened is that Saturday's come in a little bit softer than what I predicted, and they're then predicting the Sunday will be a bit softer again. Now, the Sunday numbers are not real numbers at this stage, and I think that because of the buzz and I don't want to say hype, it's not got a lot of hype, but the buzz and the good reviews mean that there's a good chance that the Sunday numbers for Shazam will be stronger than these early projections that they're actually putting forward. So we'll have to wait and see what actually happens, but at this stage, I think the Sunday numbers are a little bit soft, and it could get one or more million dollars from that and go towards the $60 million. But the early projections were $40 million for Shazam, and then the next projections that a lot of places were saying yesterday after the Friday numbers were $49 to $51 million. So it's come in ahead of all of those kind of predictions from the so-called experts, and a bit underneath the prediction that I made. But again, I think the Sunday numbers might be wrong from what they're saying, because the kind of drop-off that they're projecting from Saturday to Sunday is about a 33% reduction. That's exactly what Batman v Superman saw. So Batman v Superman basically collapsed, and they're saying Shazam will have a somewhat similar collapse. Now, it doesn't quite mean that, because what they're really saying is the money that it earned on Friday, discounting all of the advanced screenings, which is around about $14.6 million. They did revise that down a little bit, but $14.6 million. They're saying it'll earn a bit under that. So the Friday to Sunday figures are in line with what a lot of films do, but the Saturday is a little bit bigger than what some films do, but I thought the Saturday would be even bigger. So I thought there'd be a 50% increase from Friday to Saturday. There wasn't. And so the Sunday number is lower than what I predicted, but not that much lower. Okay, but anyway, I think the Sunday number still has room to improve, but we'll only see in time. Now, for the international numbers, as always, they're a complete mess, and it's very difficult to project or see what's going on, but semi-officially, a lot of places are saying that it has earned $102 million internationally. It's very vague if that includes a projection for Sunday or absolutely no Sunday money at all, but the way some places are writing this up is they're saying this is the real number. Now, it's not the real number. It'll move around. It'll change a bit. But whether the 102 is really accurate or kind of accurate, we'll have to wait to see. But at this point in time, they're claiming that it's got around about $102 million internationally, and it's got around about $53 to $56 million, depending on where you look, domestically. So if we look at Box Office Mojo right now with their worldwide openings, you can see that Shazam is right now listed as number 96. Now again, these figures are early, so it'll move around a little bit from here, but they're claiming that Shazam opened to $158.8 million worldwide. This list has not got inflation on it, and so this 96 is nowhere near as good as the real stuff. 96 doesn't sound anything special, but it'll probably drop down to be outside the top 300, I would imagine, with this kind of figure here. So it is in no way a record-setting figure. It is nothing special. But if we just look around about what are we looking at, what have we got for Shazam, you can see just underneath, or just above Shazam, I should say, is Guardians of the Galaxy #1. Now again, that's a 5-year-old film now, so it's $2 million off that, but it's really probably somewhere in the neighborhood of $12 million off if you were to add inflation in, so, or more maybe. So it's not that close to Guardians of the Galaxy, but somewhat similar. We've got Ant-Man the Wasp, that's less than a year old, so it's a few $1 million under Ant-Man the Wasp. That's a very good result. Now the main reason for that is the international money. Okay, Shazam is doing very well internationally compared to the US with just these figures here, so it's going online with some of the way some of the better films do. Not the way that some of the more excellent films do internationally, such as The Fast and the Furious and Aquaman, but it's doing somewhat in line with something like Captain Marvel, which did very well internationally compared to domestically, and some of the other MCU films. Okay, but a bit better than these ones here. Now you can see on the little percentages on the actual list here, so it says Shazam, then it says who released it, it says WB, and then we've got the 158.8, and then we've got 56.8, and then we've got 35.8%, and we've got 102, 64.2%. So that shows the percentage of how much money was in the US domestic market and how much money was in the international. And you'll notice here that they're claiming that the box office domestically is 56.8, which is not the number they use on their other screen. So Box Office Mojo is using the $56.8 million for the US domestic total on this screen, but it's using 53 or $54 million on their other screen. So a little bit of inconsistency on their own website. But you can see 35% of the money was earned in the US market. But if you look at Guardians of the Galaxy, 58% of its money was earned in the US market. And so that's why Shazam has got, let's say, a relatively good amount. I know 158 million is nothing special, but that's actually a lot better than it really is. So this 96, again, without inflation, it's way worse than 96, but 96 isn't really where it sits. So this makes Shazam look a lot better than it really is doing at this stage, because what they've managed to do with Shazam is they've managed to line up pretty much every country to open at the same time. So this $158 million is all of the countries opening at the same time, and that's what you've got. If you look at Guardians of the Galaxy, I'm not sure off the top of my head what percentage of countries had opening at the same time, but you can just tell straight away that more than half the money, nearly 60% of the money came from the US market, so that lets you know that it obviously didn't open in a lot of other countries on that weekend. Now, what does this mean for going forward? Well, films that don't have all the countries open at the same time, they look to have the illusion of legs. Okay, it doesn't mean that they do have good legs and their film keeps going on, but that's what it looks like. So, for example, they'll open to a certain amount of money, and then it'll earn unexpectedly a bit more money than they think it will with the projections. That's because more markets are actually opening up. And so, for example, if China doesn't open on your first weekend, and then China opens on the second weekend, your second weekend numbers will be looking very, very, very healthy. And they'll say, oh, this is unexpected. It's had a more money than what we thought. It's not more money than we thought. It's that countries that didn't even open are now opening up and going online. So Aquaman, for example, only had 2 countries open at the same time for the domestic opening. It had US and it also had China, but it had no other country in the world. And so, although it has had good legs legitimately, it also had every country just kind of joining in a bit later and a bit later and a bit later, and that gave a bit of an artificial boost as to what was going on with its box office. And so, if we just look at these figures here, the worldwide opening numbers, and go, okay, it looks like it's going to make similar money to Ant-Man and the Wasp, that's not necessarily true. Did Ant-Man and the Wasp have all of the countries open for this $161 million or not? That's what's very important. But just forgetting all of that just for a moment, it's online with Ant-Man and the Wasp. It's a lot more money than I think most people would have projected. And so, does that mean it's going to earn the same kind of money in total Ant-Man and the Wasp made? That could be an early prediction you could make. But again, that would be a false prediction if you aren't looking at how many countries opened for Ant-Man and the Wasp, or again, something like Guardians of the Galaxy. Now, if we look down the list a little bit, we've got number 106, Solo, a Star Wars Story. So it has opened to more money than Solo, a Star Wars Story. And you can see Solo opened to 57% to the US market. That may not be because it didn't open everywhere a lot. Star Wars films drastically underperform in China and South Korea compared to other big American movies. So MCU films compared to Star Wars films, for example, Star Wars films do terrible in China and South Korea, whatever the reason is. So the domestic money for Star Wars is still excellent if you look at just the domestic totals compared to MCU films. Okay, I think the domestic box office record for the last few films in the last few years is still Force Awakens. Force Awakens earned more money. I think it was about $900 million. Okay, actually, let's have a look. Let's not rely on what I can remember. Here are the figures on Box Office Mojo. Star Wars: The Force Awakens, yep, $936 million. This is not adjusted for inflation, by the way. This one, I can flick it to the inflation one, but that is the biggest amount of money ever. And if we look down a little bit, the best MCU film ever is Black Panther. Black Panther actually outdid Infinity War for the US domestic box office. Black Panther failed horribly internationally. If you look at the MPAA statistics, which came out a few weeks ago, the Motion Picture Association of America, Black Panther's audience in America nearly had as many black people as white. So what basically happened for Black Panther was it earned pretty good money for the audience that sees MCU films, and then a massive number of black people saw the film over and over again, or just saw it that wouldn't normally see it. So if you look at that demographic, Black Panther was propelled by black people in North America, and it wasn't propelled by anyone anywhere else in the world, basically. So other countries other than North America didn't get this African American boost, which obviously, funnily enough, there aren't African Americans living anywhere but in America, and that kind of is what happened. And obviously, Africans themselves, generally speaking, don't go to the films in a big way. They don't have a lot of money, and so any kind of extra money from Africa was non-existent, didn't really happen. So, or in other words, Europeans and Asians didn't really care for Black Panther more than a normal MCU film that's not like an Avenger film. And so it earned something like $1.3 billion, but it got $700 million in America and North America, whereas Infinity War, it earned $2 billion, but only got $670 million in the US domestic market. And so things like that, that's where there can be big differences. But again, Star Wars The Force Awakens, that has the largest amount of money for North America money, the US domestic box office, but it only took in around about the same amount of money as Avengers Infinity War. Okay, a little bit more, but that's basically how that works out. So it does depend on what the type of film is as to whether or not it is good in China, basically. And so if we look at this little graph here, we've got Shazam and Green Lantern on it. Green Lantern opened to $53.1 million, and Shazam, according to this, is opened to $53.4 million, so very similar opening, but I think Green Lantern is a good benchmark for a film that did terrible. So this is your kind of, is Shazam horribly failing or not graph to look at. So if Shazam goes underneath this amount here, we've got big trouble for what the box office really should be at this point in time. So Green Lantern, very similar opening, but absolutely terrible afterwards. So this is kind of Shazam's Batman v Superman, if you like, as I sort of kept pushing up against Captain Marvel to see if Captain Marvel's going to fail horribly. Was it going to do worse than Batman v Superman? Well, is Shazam going to do as bad as Green Lantern? So if Shazam goes under this, horrible failure. Even if the film's profitable, it's went horribly from where it sits right now after 3 days. And here are another set of films which I thought would be applicable after the Friday box office opening for Shazam, just sort of similar films. We have Ant-Man and the Wasp, we've got Ant-Man, the Wolverine, Fantastic Four, Rise of the Silver Surfer, and Green Lantern. All of them, except for Ant-Man and the Wasp, open to around about $50 million. It's 53 to 57 million. So they're all very, very similar. And you can see how big they diverge from each other, how big the fanning is from the start. Now, Ant-Man and the Wasp went a bit better. It got a $75 million US domestic box office opening. But as seen on the previous screen from Box Office Mojo, if we look at the worldwide opening, they're actually the same. And so Ant-Man and the Wasp has got a very, very big lead over Shazam right now in the US domestic market, and I expect it would maintain that. If Shazam has excellent legs, then beating Ant-Man and the Wasp, I would say, is probably the best it could do at this very, very early stage. Now, once we get Friday's numbers in from next week, that's when you can really do a real projection. But really after Monday, you should get a little bit of an idea how bad it dies off on Monday. But next Friday is when you'll get a real idea, and we'll be able to see what it should end up doing. But at this early stage, I would say Ant-Man and the Wasp for the US domestic market is probably, Shazam will do really, really well to get anything like that based on the opening, what's happening here and how far behind it is. But as for the other ones, anywhere in that range is very doable right now. So somewhere maybe above Ant-Man and maybe somewhere under the Green Lantern. So there's a very wide gap. They all opened the same. It just depends on how much people want to see these films. So generally speaking, I'd say Shazam has better reviews than most. I think Ant-Man and Ant-Man and the Wasp had quite good reviews as well, but I think its reviews are better than the Wolverine, the Fantastic Four, and Green Lantern. Not that reviews mean that much, but if it means anything, Shazam will probably earn more money than the Green Lantern or Fantastic Four and the Silver Surfer or the Wolverine. But only time will tell. We'll see what happens. But once again, we've got around about a $53 or $56 million US domestic box office opening semi-officially for, I nearly said Ant-Man, for Shazam. And we've got a semi-official $158 million worldwide opening, which puts it in front of Solo, A Star Wars Story. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.